In 1950, in the country of Albania, at the time Albania was under communist rule, and in 1950 there was a young woman who was only 23 at the time. Her name was Maria Tucci, and Maria Tucci taught third grade. And one morning, on a Wednesday morning, she got up, got dressed, she grabbed a rosary, and she was walking to the school where she taught third grade. And as she was walking with her rosary, one of the communist authorities saw her with a rosary, had her arrested for no other reason that she had a rosary. She spent the next 6 months in prison being tortured for the simple fact that she had a rosary. And they said to her, you know, Maria, this is not that big a deal. All you got to do is give us your rosary, renounce your Catholic faith, renounce Jesus Christ, and you can walk out the door. No big deal. And she said, I'm ready to die for my faith. And die she did. She gave her life. Saint Maria Tucci. That was in 1950. At the same year, in North Korea, as you know, we were going through the Korean War, and there was a Catholic priest, also an army chaplain. His name was Father Emil Capuan. He's from Kansas, and believe it or not, he and I actually went to the same seminary in St. Louis, Missouri. So he was in a prisoner of war camp. He was captured by the communists. And during his time in the prisoner of war camp, he was going from soldier to soldier to soldier, hearing confessions and trying to comfort them. It was very, very cold, so many had hypothermia. And he himself got dysentery and hypothermia, and as he's dying, Father Emil Capuan, he looks over, and the soldier right next to him has such bad frostbite on his toes that Father Emil took his feet in his lap, and he spent the next 12 hours massaging his feet because they were so black with hypothermia and frostbite. The last thing that Father Capuan did before he died is he removed his own socks and boots, put them on the soldier, and died. His cause is now up for canonization at the Vatican. How do we get this type of virtue and courage? Maria Tucci was 23 years old, Father Capuan was 35, and yet each one of them, to the very end, under great adversity and stress, gave their life. But it kind of begs the question, doesn't it? How do we grow in virtue? I mean, what does it mean to be a virtuous person, yeah? I mean, all of us would agree that we need more of this in the world, especially in this country, yeah? We need to be men and women of virtue. So how do we practice virtue? Well, how do we grow in it? We practice. How do you learn ballroom dancing? You practice. How do you learn a language? Practice. How do you learn to play guitar? Same with virtue. We practice, the saints tell us. You want to grow in virtue? Practice it. You want to grow, by the way, in vice? It works the same way. This is how we grow. We become a virtuous person, right? Self-control, modesty, honesty, integrity. Then we have the cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude, which is how we relate to other people, and the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, how we relate to God. Does anybody remember your confirmation back in 1812? You remember this? You remember the bishop asking you, what are the gifts of the Holy Spirit? Anybody remember how many gifts of the Holy Spirit there are? I'll give you a hint, there's 7. Okay. Wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety, fear of the Lord. Wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety, and fear of the Lord. Well, how do we grow in this? We practice. Practice it. We hear about this in Isaiah chapter 11, the importance of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. You know, our first president, George Washington, he said this about virtue. He said, "Virtue is tested in the presence of the highest bidder." What does that mean? Virtue's tested in the presence of the highest bidder. He said, in other words, it's easy to talk about being patient when your patience is not tested. It's easy to talk about generosity when your generosity is not tested. It's easy to talk about chastity when your chastity is not tested. It's easy to talk about patience when your patience is not tested. But we're in the presence of whatever it is, and it hits us. Now you see the mettle of the man and the mettle of the woman, because I'm going to be honest with you, folks. Here's the deal. You and I are leaders. So if you're leading your family or your marriage, people expect you to be the rudder. They expect you to steady the ship, okay? Now, you may not think of yourself as a leader, but you are. And that's when we see what we call moral character. How much can this person steady the ship in difficult times and when they're tested? Because maybe we can sum it up in this. It goes like this. Wisdom shows us the right choices to make in life, but virtue gives you the courage to make them. Wisdom will show you what are the right choices in life, but it is virtue that gives you the courage to actually make those choices. And I would add to President Washington's statements, you see real virtue in somebody when you ask the question, what do they do when no one's looking? Are they honest? Better yet, what do they do when everything falls apart, when there's a crisis, when everything hits the fan? Do they hold the line? Can they hold the line? Or do they melt like butter on a hot day? That's when we see moral character, the test of a leader. Just a question. Does anybody here pray before you go to bed? Okay, so if you're like binge watching something right now before you go to bed, just a humble suggestion. Turn it off just 2 minutes early, okay? Just 2 minutes early. And do this. St. Ignatius of Loyola, he lived in the 16th century. He called it a daily examen. That's what he said. Before you go to bed, ask yourself a couple questions. What was one thing that you're grateful for from this day? One thing. Number two, what could you have improved on? Were you short-tempered with somebody? Did somebody trigger you? Something trigger you? And finally, is there anyone you need to ask forgiveness from or forgive? You know what happens when, as the weeks and months go by, when you ask yourself, you do this daily examine? Again, 2 minutes at the end of the day. You know what happens? You begin to see trending, either up in virtue or down the other way. So basically what we're doing is we're trying to take a bird's eye view of, okay, how is my life trending, man? Like, are we getting better or not so better? Because I can guarantee you, you may not be aware of it, but the people around you are. And so the way that we grow in virtue is by practicing virtue. And that's what we're trying to do. Because the truth is, wisdom, it'll show us the right choices to make, but if somebody doesn't have virtue, they'll never have the courage to make those good choices. I'll close with this. Some of you may be aware that in Mexico, in the 1920s, from 1927 to 1929, there was a president at the time, his name was Plutarco Calles. He hated the Catholic Church. He killed thousands and thousands and thousands of Catholics. In fact, he killed nuns, priests, bishops, men, women, and children. Burned down churches, closed churches, hated them. In fact, he was so bad, he used to hang Catholics, and he would hang them from the light poles in the train station. So when the train pulled out, people pulled back the window, they'd see these bodies hanging from the poles. So as you can imagine, during that time frame, a militia formed of Catholics fighting this. They were called the Cristeros. And one of the Cristeros was a 14-year-old boy. His name was Jose Sanchez. And Jose used to take the ammunition and run it to this guy, and he would hide priests so they could celebrate Mass, which was illegal. Eventually, Jose was arrested, and they brought him into the prison. And this is what they said to Jose. They said, Jose, this is no big deal. It's no big deal. Look, all you got to do is deny your faith, reject Jesus Christ, and you can walk out the door. No big deal. By the way, one of the guys that arrested Jose was present at his baptism. So they arrested him. And Jose looked at him and he said, "Que viva Cristo Rey." Long live Christ the King. Now, what I'm about to tell you is pretty gruesome, but I feel like it's important to say it. When Jose said this, they made him lay down and they sliced off the bottom part of both of his feet. Just cut about an inch off the bottom part of both of his feet. Then they made him stand and they made him walk around the entire town. Trail of blood behind him. Can you imagine? 14 years old. And they leaned over, this guy leans over and he said, "This can all be over in a minute. We will pick you up and carry the rest of the way. All you got to do is deny your faith." And you know what he said? Que viva Cristo Rey. Long live Christ the King. He made it to the end of the town and died. Saint Jose Sanchez, canonized by Pope Francis in 2016. You know, if you go to where he's from in Michoacan province in Mexico, and I've been there, that way that he walked, all that blood he shed, is now the Stations of the Cross for the people that they pray. Now, you and I may not go through what Jose Sanchez, Maria Tucci, or Father Emil Capuan went through. Hope not. But I can guarantee you this. The choices that you and I make, there's always going to be a little voice over our shoulder that says, "Nobody's going to know. You don't have to do that. Nobody's going to know." But we, for our part, we look at that voice and we say, "Que viva Cristo Rey." Long live Christ the King. Because you know what? That is what we call moral character, and that's what we're called to do.